The room was dark, save for the faint glow of alien technology pulsating against the metallic walls. The air was dense, almost humming with an unearthly energy that felt thick against the skin. Standing there, her silhouette sharp and flawless against the dim light, was a woman known only as the Seductress. Draped in a shimmering red cloak that caught the faint light in gleaming waves, she moved with a fluid grace, each step deliberate, each glance calculated. Across from her, towering and unmistakably foreign, stood the alien queen. Her form was both beautiful and terrifying, a blend of armor-like scales and intricate organic patterns that wrapped around her body like living armor. Her head tilted, eyes narrowing as they studied the human woman with an intense curiosity laced with hostility. Behind the queen, two alien guards stood motionless, their skeletal frames casting long shadows, their mere presence a testament to the power she commanded. "Why have you come here, human?" The queen's voice echoed through the chamber, a rich, layered tone that vibrated through the walls. It was the voice of something ancient, something that knew the weight of authority. The Seductress smiled, a slow, confident smirk that danced on the edge of mockery. "I came because I have something you want. And I think we both know how persuasive I can be." The queen's gaze didn't waver, but there was a subtle shift in her stance, as though weighing the threat hidden in the woman's words. "What could you possibly offer me that I could not take?" "Oh, your majesty," the Seductress replied, her voice dripping with a dangerous sweetness. "Not everything worth having can be taken by force." She took a step forward, her eyes glimmering with a mix of challenge and allure. "But it can be given, willingly." The alien queen remained silent, her expression impassive, but there was a tension in the air now, a quiet acknowledgement of the Seductress's audacity. Very few dared speak to her in such a way. And fewer still lived to tell of it. "I know your kind well, Seductress," the queen finally replied, her voice laced with contempt. "You think you can twist minds, bend wills. But you forget who I am." She lifted her clawed hand, and the walls of the room seemed to darken, responding to her power. "Your mind games will not work on me." Unfazed, the Seductress shrugged, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Who said anything about games?" She tilted her head, letting the dim light cast shadows across her face. "I only wish to talk. To negotiate." The queen's interest was piqued, though she masked it well. The Seductress was a creature of cunning, known throughout many worlds for her ability to sway even the strongest of beings. Yet the queen's power was unyielding, a force of nature. Negotiation was not something she engaged in lightly. "Negotiate?" the queen scoffed, but there was a flicker of intrigue in her cold eyes. "You come here, alone, and expect me to believe you wish to discuss terms?" The Seductress spread her hands, palms facing upward, an invitation and a challenge all in one. "Believe what you will. I came here because I understand you, because we are not so different, you and I." Her voice softened, slipping into a gentler, almost hypnotic cadence. "You, a ruler of worlds, feared and respected. Me, someone who knows the art of power just as intimately. Imagine what we could accomplish, together." For the briefest moment, the alien queen seemed to hesitate. In that instant, the Seductress knew she had struck a nerve. The queen, for all her power, was isolated, burdened by a throne carved from fear and obedience. She was surrounded by loyalty, yes, but it was the cold, unfeeling loyalty of soldiers and servants, not the passionate loyalty of equals. But the moment passed, and the queen's expression hardened. "You speak as though you understand what it means to rule, to carry the weight of entire civilizations. Do you think flattery will grant you mercy, human?" The Seductress let out a low, soft laugh. "Mercy? No, my queen. I don't need mercy. I need an alliance." She moved closer, her hand reaching out slightly, her eyes never leaving the queen's gaze. "Let me show you what I can offer. Allow me into your world, your throne." Her words were laced with both suggestion and defiance, an intoxicating mixture that dared the queen to respond. The queen's expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those dark, predatory eyes, flashed with something that might have been curiosity. Or perhaps, a warning. "You are bold, Seductress. Boldness is a fragile shield. Boldness is only as strong as the desire behind it," the Seductress countered smoothly, her voice dropping to a whisper that barely reached the queen's ears. "And my desire is boundless." The two women locked eyes, a silent war of wills unfolding between them. In that moment, the Seductress knew she had gotten further than most who had dared to confront the alien queen. But she also knew that the next steps would be critical. One wrong move, one hint of weakness, and she would be torn apart without a second thought. And the alien queen, standing regal and imposing in the dim light, knew one thing for certain: this human was dangerous. Far more dangerous than she appeared. The alien queen's lair was an architectural marvel, a mixture of harsh metallic edges and haunting organic structures, like veins pulsing with some strange energy. The Seductress felt the alien eyes of the guards following her every move, but she walked as if she owned the place, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, reverberating through the quiet halls. She was led to a chamber, grand and ominous, where the queen awaited her. The room was lit by a strange, bioluminescent glow that danced across the walls, casting long, eerie shadows. The queen stood at the far end, a figure of authority wrapped in armor that seemed as alive as she was, its sharp edges gleaming in the dim light. The seductress couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. She had prepared for this moment meticulously, every word, every movement calculated. But here, standing in front of a creature who could crush her with a single command, she felt the intoxicating pull of danger, a reminder that she was playing with a force far beyond her own. "Did you think about my offer?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost lazy, as if the stakes weren't high enough to warrant anxiety. The queen's eyes narrowed. "I agreed to this conversation, only to see what game you think you are playing." She moved forward, her presence towering, radiating an almost physical aura of power. "You humans are weak, driven by emotions, desires. Yet you speak of alliances, as if you know what it is to rule." The seductress tilted her head, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, but desire is not a weakness, my queen. It is a force, a hunger that shapes worlds, that bends even the strongest to its will." The queen scoffed, but the flicker of intrigue in her gaze betrayed her interest. "What do you know of my will, human?" she spat, but the seductress could feel the shift, the crack in the queen's hardened facade. "I know that even the most powerful feel the weight of their own strength," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know that ruling alone is a lonely burden. That loyalty bought by fear can be hollow." She reached out, her fingers brushing ever so lightly against the cold, gleaming surface of the queen's armor. The queen froze, every muscle in her body tense, her alien guards shifting slightly, as if ready to tear the seductress apart at the first sign of threat. But the queen held up a hand, and the guards stilled. "Careful," the queen hissed, though her voice lacked the conviction of true anger. "You walk a thin line, human." The seductress let her fingers trail away from the queen's armor, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she held the queen's gaze, letting a faint smile play across her lips. "Tell me, my queen," she murmured, "have you ever wondered what it would be like to feel something else?" The question hung in the air, a dangerous invitation. For a heartbeat, the queen's expression softened, and in that brief lapse, the seductress saw something almost vulnerable. But just as quickly, the queen's face hardened again. "Do not mistake curiosity for weakness," she warned, her tone colder than before. "I have crushed empires, reduced entire planets to dust. What could a creature like you possibly know of power?" The seductress's smile widened. "Oh, I know enough. Enough to know that brute force isn't always the answer." She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a seductive murmur. "Imagine a power that doesn't need to force submission. A power that invites it." The queen's eyes flickered with something dark and unspoken. "And you think you can offer that to me?" The seductress gave a slow nod, her eyes gleaming. "All I need is for you to let me in." She let the words linger, her gaze unwavering, her hand hovering just an inch from the queen's arm. For a long, tense moment, the queen said nothing, her gaze locked on the seductress's hand. Then, as if compelled by a force she couldn't explain, she took a step back and turned, her armor shimmering in the faint light as she led the seductress deeper into the heart of her lair. They walked through winding corridors, past alien technology humming with energy, until they reached a chamber larger and more ornate than the others. The walls here were carved with intricate alien symbols that pulsed with an ancient power, and in the center stood a throne, cold, gleaming, and unmistakably regal. The queen sat, her gaze fixed on the seductress, who stood before her like a supplicant before a deity. But there was no humility in the seductress's gaze, only a quiet confidence that bordered on defiance. "This is my throne," the queen said, her voice a mixture of pride and bitterness. "This is the power you think you can share?" The seductress took a step closer, her eyes never leaving the queen's. "Power is not in the throne, my queen," she said softly. "It is in the bonds we forge, the loyalty we inspire." The queen's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. "Loyalty is earned through strength." The seductress shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "Loyalty built on fear is brittle. It shatters at the first sign of weakness. But loyalty built on connection, that is unbreakable." The queen leaned back, her eyes searching the seductress's face, as though trying to decipher her true intentions. "You speak of things you do not understand, human," she said, but there was a flicker of doubt, a hint of uncertainty in her gaze. The seductress smiled, sensing the queen's hesitation. "Let me show you," she murmured, her voice a whisper that seemed to seep into the very walls of the chamber. "Let me show you a different kind of power." The queen remained silent, her gaze unblinking, her expression unreadable. But the seductress could feel the tension in the air, the almost electric charge that crackled between them. She knew she was close, closer than anyone had ever come to breaking through the queen's icy facade. And then, the queen spoke, her voice low, almost a murmur. "You are dangerous?" The seductress inclined her head, her smile widening. "Dangerous, yes. But I am also useful. Together, we could create something unstoppable." The queen looked at her, and in that moment, the seductress knew she had planted the seed of doubt, the spark of curiosity that would be impossible to ignore. But she also knew that she was walking a fine line, that one wrong move could spell her end. But that was the thrill of it, wasn't it? The danger. The game. And as she looked into the cold, unyielding gaze of the alien queen, the seductress felt a thrill that bordered on fear. The game had only just begun. The dim light in the queen's throne room flickered as if responding to the tension that hung between the two women. For the first time, the seductress sensed something beyond the queen's unyielding facade, a hint of something hidden, something ancient, wounded, yet fiercely protected. It was a vulnerability so deeply buried that the queen herself may have forgotten it existed. And the seductress intended to uncover it. "You speak of loyalty," the queen finally said, her voice softer, almost thoughtful. "As if you understand what it means to command an empire, to rule over beings who would tear you apart if you showed even a moment of weakness." "I understand power better than you think," the seductress replied, stepping closer until she was only a breath away. Her eyes were steady, her expression unreadable. "I understand that true power is not about control, it's about influence. The ability to make others follow you not out of fear, but out of desire." The queen's gaze turned sharp, her eyes glinting with distrust. "Desire. That's all it ever is with your kind, isn't it?" She scoffed, her tone dripping with contempt. "You speak as if you hold power, but all I see is a woman intoxicated by her own charms." The seductress felt a thrill, knowing she was inching closer to the core of the queen's defenses. Intoxicated by charm, or by ambition? She smiled, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Or perhaps, my queen, by curiosity?" The queen's eyes flickered, a brief moment of doubt crossing her face. "Curiosity is a weakness," she said sharply, though the strength behind her words wavered. "Or it's the beginning of understanding," the seductress countered. Her gaze softened, shifting from the dangerous spark of seduction to something more genuine, almost gentle. "Have you ever wondered, my queen, what it would be like to rule, without fear? Without the endless solitude that comes with sitting alone on that throne?" For a moment, silence reigned in the chamber. The queen's gaze was distant, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice a low murmur. "Once, perhaps. But I learned long ago that isolation is the price of power." The seductress took another step forward, reaching out slowly, cautiously, her hand hovering just near the queen's. "But must it be?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could have allies. Real allies. People who serve you willingly, not out of obligation, but out of trust." "Trust." The queen's voice hardened, her expression darkening. "Trust is the first thing to be betrayed. I trusted once, and it nearly cost me my kingdom." The seductress felt a tremor of revelation. Beneath the queen's stoic exterior, there was a wound, a betrayal so deep that it had left a scar on her very soul. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a gentle murmur, almost as if she were speaking to a wounded creature rather than a fearsome ruler. "Tell me who betrayed you." The queen's eyes flashed, and for a moment, it seemed as if she might lash out, might strike the seductress down where she stood. But instead, she hesitated, her gaze softening with a pain so raw it was almost startling. "He was my consort," the queen finally said, her voice a bitter whisper. "The one being I allowed close enough to know my thoughts, my secrets. And he betrayed me?" Her face twisted in a bitter smile. "He sold my secrets to my enemies, led a rebellion against me. I crushed him, of course, and everyone who stood with him. But since that day, I have allowed no one close. Loyalty, trust, they are illusions. Weapons that others wield to bring you down." The seductress listened, her heart pounding with the thrill of the revelation. She could feel the queen's pain, her anger, but also the loneliness that lay beneath it all, a loneliness that was as much a part of her as her crown. "What if I could offer you something different?" the seductress murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. "What if I could be the one ally who would never betray you?" The queen laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the chamber. "You? A mere human? Do you think I'm a fool?" But the seductress did not flinch. Instead, she took a bold step closer, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I think you are someone who has been hurt, who has been betrayed, and who has closed herself off to prevent it from happening again. But that loneliness, that constant suspicion, it's eating you alive, isn't it?" The queen's face twisted with anger, but the seductress saw the flicker of truth in her eyes, the brief moment of weakness that betrayed her. "You speak as if you know me," the queen hissed. "As if you have seen my life, my struggles?" "I don't need to see it," the seductress replied, her voice soft and steady. I feel it. I see it in your eyes. You rule with an iron fist, but every time you crush someone beneath it, a piece of yourself is lost. She held the queen's gaze, her own filled with a surprising gentleness. Let me help you find it again. For a long, tense moment, the queen said nothing. Her gaze was cold, unyielding, yet there was a vulnerability there, a tiny fracture in her armor that the seductress could almost feel. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the queen turned her back, her gaze fixed on the far wall of the chamber. I do not need help. I do not need anyone. Her voice was sharp, but there was a faint tremor in it, a tremor that revealed just how much the seductress's words had shaken her. The seductress took a step back, her gaze unwavering. Perhaps not, she said quietly. But you cannot deny that there is something missing, a part of you that longs for connection. For something more than just obedience? The queen remained silent, her back still turned, her shoulders rigid with tension. And in that moment, the seductress knew that she had planted a seed of doubt, of curiosity, that would continue to grow, whether the queen wanted it or not. But there was one more card she had to play. Let me prove it to you, she said, her voice steady, confident. Give me one chance to show you a different way. One moment of your time, one night. If I fail, I will leave, and you will never see me again. The queen turned slowly, her gaze piercing, her expression cold and unreadable. For a moment, the seductress thought she would refuse, that her pride and anger would override her curiosity. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the queen gave a slow, reluctant nod. Very well, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. One night. But if you betray me, if you show even a hint of deceit, I will destroy you. The seductress inclined her head, a slow, confident smile spreading across her face. I wouldn't expect anything less, my queen. As she watched the queen turn and disappear into the shadows, the seductress felt a thrill of anticipation. The game was far from over. In fact, it had just reached its most dangerous stage. And she intended to play it to the very end. The alien queen's chambers were unlike any other part of her lair. Here, the alien architecture softened slightly, the edges less severe, the walls adorned with symbols that glowed with a quiet, ethereal light. There was a stillness in the room, a silence that felt intimate, almost sacred. And it was here, in this hidden sanctuary, that the queen had agreed to meet the seductress for their one night, a test of trust, or perhaps, a final trap. The seductress felt the weight of the moment as she stood alone in the room, her fingers grazing the strange patterns on the walls. She could feel the hum of alien energy beneath her touch, as if the entire space was alive, observing her. She knew she was entering forbidden territory, but the risk only fueled her determination. She would either succeed here or be obliterated, there would be no middle ground. She heard the soft, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps, and she turned to see the queen standing at the entrance, her form silhouetted against the faint glow of the corridor. In the dim light, the queen's armor seemed to ripple, like shadows moving across her skin, emphasizing her otherworldly beauty and the dangerous aura that surrounded her. You came, the seductress murmured, her voice low, laced with a subtle warmth. She let her gaze linger, an invitation without words. The queen's eyes were cold, wary, as she stepped further into the room. I came only because I am curious, she replied, her voice laced with skepticism. You speak of loyalty, of trust, as if you understand these things. But I still wonder, if you truly believe in what you offer? The seductress inclined her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. Trust is not given freely, my queen. It is earned? She took a slow step forward, her movements graceful, unthreatening. Tonight, I ask nothing from you, but that you allow yourself to feel. To remember what it is to have a choice. The queen scoffed, though her voice lacked its usual venom. Choice? My life has been one of duty, of survival. Choice is a luxury I have long abandoned. Then let me give it back to you, the seductress said softly, her voice a whisper that slipped through the still air. She held out her hand, palm up, an offering. Just for this one night, let go of the weight. The throne, the crown, let it all fall away. For a long, agonizing moment, the queen stared at her, her expression unreadable. The silence in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken words and hidden desires. Then, with a slow, reluctant movement, the queen reached out, her hand hovering over the seductress's, her fingers trembling ever so slightly before they brushed against the warmth of human skin. The touch was electric, a spark that shot through them both, an undeniable connection that neither could ignore. The queen's face softened, her cold exterior melting for a brief instant, revealing the vulnerability she had hidden for so long. Why do you do this? The queen asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. What do you stand to gain? The seductress hesitated, her own walls threatening to crack. In truth, she had come here with an agenda, a desire to manipulate, to control. But standing here, feeling the pulse of life beneath the queen's armor, she realized that her motives had shifted. The queen's loneliness, her hidden pain, it resonated with a part of the seductress she had buried long ago. "What I gain," she began, her voice faltering, the mask of seduction slipping ever so slightly, "is not power or control. What I gain is understanding. And perhaps, a chance to prove that not everyone will betray you." The queen's gaze softened, her eyes searching the seductress's face, as though trying to glimpse the truth beneath the words. "You speak as if you know betrayal," she murmured, her voice laced with an almost reluctant curiosity. The seductress's smile faded, replaced by a look of sadness, of memories too painful to revisit. "We all know betrayal, my queen. In one form or another." She took a deep breath, steadying herself, before reaching up to touch the side of the queen's face, her fingers gentle, reverent. "But it is our choice what we do with that pain. We can use it as a shield, or we can let it go." The queen's eyes flickered, her expression softening as she leaned into the touch, her face inches away from the seductress's. For the first time, her armor seemed to relax, her sharp edges dulled, her entire form radiating an unexpected warmth. "And you think you can teach me to let go?" The seductress's smile returned, gentle, inviting. "I can show you. But only if you are willing." A flicker of doubt crossed the queen's face, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she took a slow, steady breath, her gaze locked with the seductress's, as if finding the courage to let down the walls she had built for so long. Then, in a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them, her lips brushing against the seductress's in a kiss that was both tentative and fierce, a collision of strength and vulnerability. It was a surrender, a release of the iron grip she held over herself. The seductress felt her own resolve waver as the kiss deepened, the warmth of the queen's lips melting away her carefully crafted facade. She realized that this moment, this fragile connection, was more than she had anticipated, more than she had planned for. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and utterly real. When they finally broke apart, the queen's eyes were clouded, her expression conflicted. She took a step back, her face a mixture of confusion and fear, as though she had glimpsed a part of herself she had long denied. I do not understand this," she whispered, her voice raw, vulnerable. "I am a queen. I am not meant to feel, to want." The seductress reached out, her hand closing gently over the queen's. "You are more than just a queen. You are a being, one who has known pain, and strength, and loneliness. Let yourself be more, just for tonight." The queen looked down, her hand trembling in the seductress's grasp. You will leave, won't you? After tonight?" The seductress hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. She had come here with the intent to manipulate, to gain influence over a powerful ruler. But now, faced with the queen's vulnerability, she found herself questioning her own motives. She could see the pain in the queen's eyes, the fear of abandonment that lay beneath her fierce exterior. "I will stay," she said softly, surprising even herself. "As long as you need me, I will stay." The queen's gaze lifted, her eyes wide with a hope so fragile it made the seductress's heart ache. She had won the queen's trust, but it no longer felt like a victory. It felt like something infinitely more dangerous, a connection that could shatter them both. They sat together in silence, the queen's hand still held tightly in the seductress's grasp, the air between them charged with unspoken promises and fragile hopes. And as the night wore on, they let their guards fall, their shared vulnerability weaving a bond neither had anticipated. But somewhere in the shadows, the seductress knew that the dawn would bring questions, doubts, and a test of loyalty neither of them were prepared to face. For the queen was not just a lover, but a ruler, and her world was one of darkness, secrets, and power struggles. And in the morning light, she would have to decide whether to keep this human close, or to cast her aside as a fleeting indulgence. The dawn came slowly, casting a pale, eerie light through the alien queen's chambers. The seductress lay awake, feeling the weight of the queen's gaze upon her. There was no gentleness now in those predatory eyes, only calculation and an unspoken warning. The night's vulnerability had vanished, replaced by a cold resolve that chilled the seductress to her core. The queen rose silently, her armor shifting back into place, its edges sharp and unyielding. She seemed once again the ruler who commanded fear, untouchable and distant. The warmth they had shared now felt like an illusion, as though the softness of the night before had been nothing more than a passing dream. "Get up," the queen commanded, her voice a harsh contrast to the quiet intimacy they'd shared hours earlier. "We have unfinished business." The seductress sat up, her expression calm but her mind racing. She knew she had awakened something within the queen, something powerful and fragile. But she also knew that her presence here was now under intense scrutiny. She would have to tread carefully. "What do you want from me, my queen?" she asked softly, standing and adjusting her cloak, her gaze steady. The queen's lips curved into a cold, unreadable smile. You spoke of loyalty, of trust, she said, circling the seductress slowly, her gaze piercing. Last night, you promised that you would stay, as long as I needed you. She stopped, her face close enough that the seductress could feel her breath. Now I ask you to prove it. The seductress held her ground, despite the flicker of dread creeping into her chest. What would you have me do? The queen's eyes narrowed, the faintest glimmer of something cruel flashing within them. My enemies have conspired against me, and I want you to show me where your true loyalties lie. She motioned to one of her guards, who approached, carrying a strange, glistening orb that pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy. This is a weapon of my kind, the queen explained, her voice calm, almost detached. In the hands of an ally, it is a symbol of loyalty. In the hands of a betrayer, her gaze darkened. It is a sentence of death. The seductress felt her pulse quicken as she eyed the orb. She could feel the raw, destructive power emanating from it, a force that seemed to vibrate with anticipation, waiting to be unleashed. She looked back at the queen, realizing that this was her test, the ultimate gamble. If she faltered now, if she showed any sign of hesitation, the queen would destroy her. Take it, the queen commanded, her voice a chilling whisper. If you are loyal, if you truly understand the power of trust, then you will accept this weapon and use it as I command. The seductress reached out, her hand steady, her mind racing. She understood the stakes. This was not just a test of loyalty, it was a game of life and death. The queen wanted to know if she could trust her, or if this was all a carefully orchestrated scheme. With a final, decisive movement, the seductress took the orb, feeling its dark energy pulse through her fingers. She held it carefully, meeting the queen's gaze with a quiet, determined look. What would you have me do, my queen? She asked, her voice steady, her loyalty unwavering. The queen's eyes narrowed, studying her face for any sign of deceit. There is a traitor in my court, she said slowly, her voice laced with venom. A high-ranking commander who has betrayed me, sold information to my enemies. He is one of the few I once trusted, and his betrayal is a reminder of the price of misplaced faith. She stepped closer, her gaze dark and fierce. If you are truly loyal, you will use this weapon to eliminate him. The seductress's heart skipped a beat. She understood now, this was not just a test of loyalty. It was a test of her willingness to become the queen's executioner, to prove her devotion by carrying out a death sentence. She knew that her response here would determine everything. If she refused, she would be branded a traitor. If she agreed, she would forever bind herself to the queen's dark world, becoming both ally and accomplice. After a moment's pause, she nodded, her expression resolute. Consider it done. The queen's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment, the seductress thought she saw a flicker of approval, perhaps even a hint of respect. Good, the queen said, her voice softening slightly. Prove your loyalty, and I will grant you a place beside me, a place of power, beyond what you could ever imagine. With that, the queen turned, her cloak sweeping behind her as she left the chamber, leaving the seductress alone with the deadly orb in her hands. Hours later, the seductress stood in the palace corridors, the orb still in her grasp, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. She had agreed to the queen's test, yes. But the weight of what she was about to do hung over her, pressing down with a crushing force. She knew what it meant to take a life. She had used seduction, manipulation, persuasion, but to kill in cold blood? That was something else entirely. As she approached the quarters of the commander, her steps slowed. She hesitated, the orb heavy in her hands, the darkness within it seeming to whisper, to urge her forward. She knew she had a choice, to carry out the queen's order, solidifying her loyalty, or to find another way, though she wasn't sure what that could be. The door to the commander's chamber opened, and there he stood, a towering figure clad in the dark, skeletal armor of the queen's elite. His face softened with a faint smile, his eyes filled with an unexpected kindness, the look of someone who had once believed in his ruler, who had perhaps made sacrifices in her name. The seductress felt a pang of doubt. She could feel the weight of the queen's expectations, the threat that lingered if she dared to disobey. But there was a voice within her, a whisper that reminded her of what she had told the queen, that true loyalty was not built on fear, but on trust, on connection. "What brings you here, stranger?" the commander asked, his voice deep and calm, unaware of the lethal object she held. She hesitated, her mind racing. And then, in that moment, she made her choice. She raised the orb, not as a weapon, but as an offering, letting it hover between them. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The commander's eyes widened as he understood, as he saw the truth in her gaze, the plea for an alliance, for a way to escape the cycles of betrayal and fear that had consumed the queen's court. Together, they formed a plan, a secret alliance built not on seduction or manipulation, but on a shared understanding of the queen's tyranny. They knew it was dangerous, that if they were caught, they would be destroyed without hesitation. But they were willing to risk it. In the throne room, the queen sat, her expression cold, unfeeling, as she awaited the seductress's return. Hours passed, and finally, the seductress appeared, her expression calm, the orb still glowing faintly in her hands. "It is done," she said, her voice steady, hiding the tension that simmered beneath the surface. The queen rose, her eyes narrowing as she studied the seductress's face. "Good. You have proven yourself." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Now, you will be my closest ally, my most trusted confidant." But as the seductress met her gaze, she felt a chill run through her. For she knew that, in forging this alliance with the commander, she had sown the seeds of rebellion. She had betrayed the queen's trust even as she had earned it, and now, she was trapped in a deadly game, where any slip could spell her end. The queen leaned in, her hand closing over the seductress's shoulder, her voice a dark, menacing whisper. "But remember, my dear," she said, her voice laced with deadly promise, "if you betray me, there will be no mercy." The seductress forced a smile, her heart pounding as she replied, "I wouldn't expect anything less, my queen." And as she stood beside the queen, knowing the hidden conspiracy that now lurked within the palace walls, she realized that she had become both ally and adversary, friend and traitor. The game she had started would continue, its stakes higher than ever. But she was ready. For she knew that in this world of power, deception, and darkness, survival was the only rule.